This brief tutorial is going to talk a little bit about the speech process. That is, what steps should you be following whenever you put together an informative or persuasive speech this semester? I really recommend using this process whenever you're putting your speeches together because speech writing is not an intuitive or linear process. And you'll see what I mean when I talk about the steps in this process. So I'd like for you to use this as a roadmap whenever you're putting your speech together. And this process works whether you're working on an informative speech or persuasive speech. And this is actually the process that I've used whenever putting together professional presentations outside of college. So I really recommend using it. I've experienced a great deal of success using this process. So let's talk about each one of these steps. You'll see the first step here, quite obviously, select a topic. Within our class this semester, that means working with the speech requirements for each speech and making sure that you select a topic that meets those requirements. In some cases, you're provided with a list of topics that you select from, and in other cases, you have to come up with the topic. But as a starting point, you need something to talk about, obviously, so you'll want to select a topic. Now, the next two steps I'll say more about later on this semester. Step 2 is to analyze your audience. And hopefully this step gives everyone a moment's pause, in that many of us think, well, once I select my topic, I just start writing my speech, right? Wrong. The way that it works is, after you have a topic, you need to start to think about your audience. And what do they need to know? What do they already know about the topic? How do they feel about it? What do they believe? And these kinds of questions become especially relevant once you start to work on your persuasive speech. Because if you're trying to persuade an audience to take your course of action or to change their attitude on a topic that you're discussing, if you don't know what their position already is, you're pretty much wasting your breath. And I don't want you to do that this semester. So we'll say more about analyzing the audience in a later tutorial. And the third step is, once you've completed that audience analysis, how do you need to change your approach on the topic that you're thinking about? So based on the feedback that you get from your audience, how do you need to change what you plan on doing? Okay. Now, with your first speech, you don't need to conduct an audience analysis. But with all other subsequent speeches this semester, you need to do this. So with the first speech, you don't need to worry about steps 2 and 3. But with speeches 2, 3, and 4, you'll want to pay more attention to this. So the next two steps are definitely connected. Step 4 is to write the specific purpose. And the specific purpose, in a nutshell, is the goal of your presentation. That is, what do you want to accomplish as a result of your speech? As the speaker, you need to be able to summarize your presentation in a sentence. And ideally, the specific purpose should do that. Okay, so if you can't articulate your goal, what it is you hope to accomplish by the end of your presentation, you're in real trouble. So you'll want to spend extra time on steps 4 and 5. Step 5 is the central idea. And the central idea, the way that I think about it, is the central idea shows the main points in your presentation. And the main points are the key things that you plan on talking about in the body of your speech. Okay, so step 4 is you articulating the goal for your speech. Step 5 is you listing out all of the main ideas for your speech. And those things are subject to change, especially once you start practicing your speech. And I'll say more about that in a few moments. Okay. Step 4 and step 5 are what I call the foundation for your speech. The better written these pieces are, the better your speech inevitably will be. Okay, so whenever I take a look at a student's outline and I see a poorly written specific purpose and or a poorly written central idea, I know that that isn't going to be a strong speech. So the better and stronger steps 4 and 5 are, the more effective your speech will be generally. Step 6 is, well, now that you have your goal and your main ideas, you need to start to think about how should I organize them. If you take a look in chapter 8 within the Lucas book, it talks about a number of methods of organization, from chronological to spatial to causal to problem solution to topical. So there's a wide variety of ways that you could organize this information. This is important because, again, thinking back to your audience, you need to pay attention to how that information is organized, because your audience is counting on you to be clear, and they need to be able to make sense of this information. So you need to think about, what's the best way for me to organize this? Along with that, you need to begin conducting research. So once you have your main ideas down, you'll want to get into the library databases using print media and start to pull together some research and information that's going to help build your speech. This information has to be accurate, and it has to be relevant, and it has to be clear. And by clear, that also means well sourced. So you should not be using things like Wikipedia, etc. So that's why I strongly recommend using the library website for all of your research, because that information has been quality tested, and when you get it from there, you know it's good. So on to step 7. Finally, we get to the point where you write the body of your speech. Okay, now again, you'll notice we didn't start by writing the introduction or the conclusion. You start with the body of the speech. This is where you're spending most of your time, and you already have this part sketched out because you've already completed step 5, which is writing the central idea. Now, this semester, whenever we're working on a speech, we're limiting our main ideas, our main points, to at least 2, but no more than 5. Okay, so this is going to impact your research. You shouldn't have 10 main ideas or 10 chunks of information that you want to talk about. You're going to have to narrow that information down and work it so it fits into the requirements of the speech, time-wise as well as citation-wise. And also, that way we're not flooding our audience with a lot of information. A common misperception with public speaking is that a lot of information is a good thing. That's not necessarily the case. Sometimes the best messages are very streamlined and very concise. So we start writing the body of our speech, and we're narrowing and working on keeping it between 2 to 5 main ideas. After we have the body written, then we sit down and write the introduction and the conclusion to our speech. The introduction generally does 4 things. It gains attention, it reveals the topic, it establishes speaker credibility, and it also previews the main ideas. And the conclusion always does 3 things. It signals the end of the speech, summarizes main ideas, and ends the speech on a compelling or inspiring or motivational note. And I'll say more about these 2 items in a later tutorial. So on to step 9. You'll notice it has us preparing visual support. That means things like PowerPoints or handouts or whatever materials we need to use to communicate visually to our audience. Another common misperception around PowerPoint, whenever we're given a presentation assignment, is to sit down at a computer and open up PowerPoint and start to fill it in. And I think that's where we end up with death by PowerPoint. That's where PowerPoint just overwhelms our speech. I recommend limiting PowerPoint to no more than 5 slides. If you can't say it in 5 slides, really PowerPoint isn't the appropriate medium. So you want to work on that visual support. For this class, it'll be primarily working with PowerPoint. And then the 10th step in this process is to practice verbalizing your speech to a practice audience. So this is not only practicing, but paying attention to how we practice. So if you're standing in your bedroom reading your speech to your cat, I would argue that you're not practicing. Practice means gathering a practice audience, presenting the information to them, and then asking them questions like, how did that sound? Did it make sense? What were my main ideas? What did I do really well? What do I need to work on? Right? So that's when you could start to make editorial choices around, well, gee, how did my main ideas sound in that order? Or what if I tried a different method of organization? So you really can't make those editorial choices just by reading your outline. Okay, because the written word translates very differently in a speech, and what might look good in an outline might be very difficult to say as a speaker, and it might be extremely difficult for your audience to follow. So you must practice your speech and practice it to an audience and get feedback about what they think and what makes sense and what works and what doesn't work, and then go back and revise all of these different pieces of your speech. It's a little bit of extra work, to be sure, but it's well worth it in the end. So definitely think about how you could maximize your practice time. Research has shown that good speeches in a classroom setting in college are practiced at least 6 times. So for a 10-minute speech, if you want to factor in an extra hour to practice, that 10-minute presentation, I think that would be a very good move. So those are the 10 steps in the process. Just to bring it to how it fits into the Art of Public Speaking by Lucas, you could see here which chapters line up with which steps. So step 1, selecting a topic, is covered in chapter 4. Steps 2 and 3 are covered in chapter 5. Step 4 and 5 are also covered in chapter 4. Step 6 is covered in chapter 7. Plus there's a library guide which is linked into the course home space, so you could access library databases easily. Step 7 is covered in chapter 8. Step 8 is covered in chapter 9. The information on PowerPoint and visual aids is in chapter 13. And just going back and practicing, really there's no silver bullet when it comes to giving great presentations. They're practiced, so make sure you factor in time to do that. What I'll be doing as we go through the semester is covering each one of these steps in a little bit more detail and talking about them a little bit more thoroughly. So as questions come up, please don't hesitate to message me within Canvas or post them into the discussion area of the course space. And best of luck this semester, and I look forward to some great speeches. Thank you.